Good afternoon, everybody. This is Dr. Mike Talbot with our webinar for today on how to resolve return to work conflict. So we're looking today at all of the issues that are now arising, that people are coming back from shielding and furloughing and changes in their hours and working regimes back into workplaces during the coronavirus pandemic. So just before we begin, I'm Dr. Mike Talbot, as mentioned, and I run UK Mediation. I'm a psychotherapist by trade, please don't run away. And I set up UK Mediation about 21 years ago to look at how we can apply what we know about what makes people tick to the better understanding of conflict, why we get into conflict, why we get stuck into conflict, and what we can do as impartial third parties to try and resolve that conflict. So I'm basically trying to take the lessons that I learned as a psychotherapist over the 15 years I had practice and apply those in business, in neighbourhoods, in families, in workplaces, in committees, in boardrooms, international work, commercial work, and try and resolve the ways that people can fall out. So that's what we're all about. So I'm really pleased that you are able to join us this afternoon. I will be speaking for about 45 minutes. We've got many dozens of people on, not just from the UK, but from around the world for our webinar this afternoon. And you are all welcome to comment and ask questions. In recent webinars, we've had a wealth of questions and it's great. It makes the whole thing a bit more lively and interactive. You will have a chat box up on your screen, and within the chat box you are able to comment or ask questions. If you prefer to wait till the end, I'll leave a bit of time for a Q&A, but do please feel free to chip in as we go along, and I'll pause occasionally and address the questions or comments that we get. So let's crack on. So our overview for today is we're going to talk about the types of conflict that returning to work can bring. So what's going to go wrong when people come back into the workplace? So people have been off for several months. Some have been off, some have not been off. People have been working from home with everything that brings. We know from all of the surveys and research the sort of impact that lockdown has had on people. And I think one way that this can be released, a bit of a pressure valve, can be when people come back to work. It's going to be a great relief for some people, mixed blessings for others, and for other people it may be quite difficult, quite stressful, depending on the nature of the work that they're doing. We're looking at people going back to schools quite shortly. We've had people who would have been off in the summer, they'd got holidays booked, etc. Got people who've been working right through, got people who've been on reduced hours, people who've been on mixed contracts, doing some work at home, some work in the workplace. So what kind of conflicts can arise from all of that melting pot? We've taken a close look at this, and we've been getting quite a bit of work and a lot of inquiries over the last couple of months as people come back to work. And what we've done is to put some lessons together into our return to work roadmap. So I'll be talking about our roadmap, which includes 10 top tips, of course, on what to do with people returning to work, and a few other things in our return to work roadmap which we'll point you towards. And then we're talking about how mediation can be implemented. There are a number of situations that can arise in this return to work environment which could be addressed potentially with mediation, and we'll talk about how that could happen, and also give you an idea about what else can be done in terms of resolving conflict. So I'm looking specifically today at the issues related to conflict and its resolution, and talking about what else can be done as well as mediation and as well as our top tips as part of our roadmap. Q&A at the end, and you're very welcome, like I say, to ask questions or comment as we go along. So let's get stuck in. What sort of conflict are we talking about with people coming back to work? Well, here at UK Mediation we like to illustrate things as much as we can. So we've got a little piece that we've put together for you. A short video, just about 3 minutes or so. I'm going to narrate the video. There's no dialogue on it, just to illustrate rather than just tell you using PowerPoint slides the kind of things that can happen when somebody's been off work, or somebody's been furloughed rather, and somebody else has remained in the office throughout the lockdown period. So we're going to see two characters who I'll introduce in the narrative, and then we'll see what happens when one of them comes back into the workplace. So first of all, let's take a look at the two characters. Here's Imogen, she's the customer services advisor, and here's Heather, she's the accounts admin person, and they both work together in a busy plumbing supplies. and we see here the situation where Imogen's been off. She's coming back into the work. There's Scott, the manager. Imogen looks after an elderly relative and also has a child with asthma. She's very, very careful. She's been particularly fastidious about the precautions, about making sure she's cleansing her hands all the time, sanitising her hands, keeping things clean, being extremely careful. This is not what Heather's got used to. Heather's been in the office on her own. She's not been particularly cautious. She's a bit of an anti-masker, as it happens. She doesn't like to be told you have to do this, you have to do that, and she's been sort of doing things her way rather, while she's been continuing to work throughout lockdown. She's also got her own idea about arrangements for her social life. She's been carrying on as normal. She's on the phone here revisiting a do that she went on and planning a picnic for next week. Anyway, while Imogen's been off, Heather's been changing a few procedures, she's streamlined a few processes. Imogen's come back in, and in Heather's words, she's messed up. She's not got the hang of these new processes. She has had it explained to her by Heather, she says, but Imogen's not using this new procedure correctly. She's putting things in the wrong places, says Heather, so Heather's getting very frustrated with Imogen. She's finding stuff in all the wrong places. She's finding that the system's not being used correctly. Imogen's having to ask a lot of questions. She's saying, I know you told me, but how are you doing this now? How have you changed that now? And Heather's not really communicated to Imogen. Anyway, she's flying off the handle. She's had enough. Imogen's asking these questions that Heather believes she's answered. She's flipped. She's got used to being in the office on her own, new procedures, new way of doing things. Imogen's back in there, scrubbing the desks all over the place. Heather's fed up. Imogen doesn't know what's hit her. She's off to the manager's door. She needs to speak to the manager about what's going on. She feels she's been treated very unfairly by Heather. She's tried to resolve it, and she wants to go in and speak to Scott about it. First thing that Scott wants to do is to give her a good listening to, see what's going on. He's had a tricky job of trying to manage this whole situation, with Imogen being furloughed and Heather not. There are other workers around as well, and there's been some controversy about who's been selected for furlough. Anyway, he decides to get the two of them together for a bit of a dialogue, try and have a resolution meeting, and facilitate some kind of a conversation between the two of them. So with suitable distancing, he gets them together in his office, try to get some dialogue going. It's clear that there's some pre-existing issues between these two. This is not going to go away with a wave of a hand. Scott's rather frustrated by this. He's going to have to look for outside help. So that to us represents a fairly typical situation, and something that we've come across quite a lot in the last few weeks, couple of months, illustrated here by Heather and Imogen. So let's have a think about the sorts of things that we've had coming through on our inquiry lines, and the sorts of things we can see here illustrated with Heather and Imogen. Differing beliefs. Certainly there's a generational thing with this, in my experience. Some people have been completely locking themselves away for very good reasons, because of age, pre-existing conditions, comorbidity, the sorts of things that we now know have led to coronavirus having a much more profound impact on people's health. People are shielding, so we have shielders. Then we've got people who think this is all a hoax, it's been exaggerated, it's just a bad flu, young people are immune to it, and why should I have to wear a mask? Nobody's going to tell me what to do. So we'll call them the anti-maskers. I'm exaggerating it slightly hyperbolic there, just to illustrate that people do have very, very different ideas. And I think in everybody's experience, those of us like myself who were quite careful, going through the supermarket and having people brushing against me with their masks around their chins, I'm thinking, did you not know, did you not hear the advice? Whereas on the other hand, I have elderly relatives who have pretty well locked themselves away for 3 months, and I'm extremely careful, not to go anywhere near them. So differing beliefs, differing interpretations of the advice, just communication issues, and as is our experience over the last 21 years, a lot of conflict is down to poor communication, and these kinds of things are magnified in stressful situations. So in the current stressful situation with the pandemic and with return to work, any communication issues that were pre-existing where people just don't get each other or are not able to relate very well to one another, these are going to be amplified. Then we have the procedural changes. So as we've seen there with Heather and Imogen, while Imogen's been off on furlough, Heather's changed a few procedures. She's been in the office on her own. It's not been as busy as normal. She's had a look at a couple of processes and thought, oh, why do we do it that way? Let's change this. Let's tweak that. Let's get rid of the other. So a few procedural changes to change this, that and the other from Heather's point of view to make it more streamlined. And with Imogen coming back into the office, Heather's not perhaps taken the time or had the inclination to explain fully to Imogen what's changed, what's new. And then she's gone and got frustrated when Imogen's not been on board with these new procedures, even though Heather's told her all about it from Heather's point of view. Imogen's not got the hang of the new procedures. She's putting things in the wrong place. She's using their CRM system and their online processes. She's not using them correctly. And Heather's got particularly fed up about that and has flipped. Allegations of favouritism. So not so much in the Heather and Imogen case, but we have had quite a bit of traffic on our lines and on our inquiries of people saying, you know, there have been unfair criteria applied to who was furloughed in the first place and what happens when they come back. Offices have been physically rearranged and employees have walked back in on the day they come back off furlough to go, well, why is she being put by the window and why is he being put there and how come these three desks are so far apart when those two are fairly close together? So, you know, people can, in the absence of information, I think what we do is project. So in the psychology of conflict, what we're doing is filling in the gaps with our expectations and suppositions about what's going on in the mind of the person who made the decision to put the desks where they are or to arrange the office in the way that they have. So we can allege favouritism. People feel as if this has not been done fairly or equitably, and they will accuse and blame for the decisions that have been made that they feel have not gone in their best interests. And the other one is any grudges or resentments. So it's an interesting one that we found is that during furlough, we've had quite a few cases come in of people saying, you know, now that we're off working from home, we think it would be a good time to do some online mediation between these two characters who've had a poor relationship in the workplace for 6 months before they went home on furlough or went home to home working, just to make that distinction. And we feel that while they're off, it might be a good time to try and resolve things so that when they come back into the workplace, they've cleared the air and they have addressed any of these grudges or resentments that were pre-existing prior to furlough or the period of working from home. So these are the kinds of things that can happen. So we've seen a few of those illustrated with the little Heather and Imogen video there. These are quite generic, so we've tried to sort of summarise them here in the Heather and Imogen cameo, but we've seen them happening all over the place. And many of the inquiries and contact forms that we've been getting over this period are fairly well typified by this list of just 5 bullet points there about the sorts of conflict. What can we do? Just a comment here that's come through from Bill. Hi Bill, thanks for that. So staff will need re-onboarding back into the organisation. Yeah, you bet. I've got some tips for that one, Bill. And poor communication or poor planning in anticipation of this type of conflict. I agree, and I think the gist of today, thanks very much Bill, the gist of today really is saying, you know, be ready. So this kind of conflict is likely to occur. I think there can be a tendency amongst some managers, some teams, not everybody, I'm pleased to say, well, yeah, it'll be okay, things will be all right, it'll come out in the wash. But I think this situation that we've got now, people coming back in after being furloughed or coming back into the office after a period of working from home, it's exactly the kind of situation where you need to anticipate conflict. Try and head it off. We do know in our experience of 21 years of doing this that you know, the earlier that you can get in with some sort of positive solution-focused intervention, the more likely you are to preclude a claim or a more serious sort of litigious fallout between parties. So get in soon, anticipate conflict, try and head it off, and try and have systems in place so that the conflict is nipped in the bud and doesn't progress into something more serious. So I'd absolutely agree. Bill, for your 2 points really, which is about good onboarding and also some planning to anticipate that this kind of conflict can occur. Which leads us precisely into the next bit, which is about what can organisations do to resolve these kinds of problems. So talking about those kinds of conflicts as illustrated with the Imogen and Heather, And relating to your comments there, Bill, what can organisations do to resolve these kinds of conflict? Well, we've had a good old think about this over the last few weeks and months, and we've put our heads together here at UK Mediation to think about, let's put this together into a roadmap. So we're going to put a link up in the chat box for you. It's not a salesy thing, it's just some free ideas and resources, some pointers to other organisations as well that might be helpful when you're thinking about resolving these kinds of conflict. And we've put it together under the umbrella of our return to work roadmap. So I'm just going to draw a few bits out from this. The link has now appeared if you want to have a look at that after the webinar for the return to work roadmap. It includes our top 10 tips. So let's have a look at that. You can look at the detail of it on the website yourself, but I'm just going to zip through and give you some ideas about what you can do with people coming back in. And as our viewer says, you know, anticipating conflict, there's a few things that you can do to try and manage the situation better so that you don't wait until it kicks off, really, to use the jargon, but you're able to anticipate what could happen within the days and weeks of people coming back into the workplace. I think the very first thing for us, our approach has always been to give people a good listening to, and I've been saying it ever since I started doing this work, and like I say, from my background as a therapist, you know, I really value the benefits of empathic, impartial listening, giving people a good opportunity to sound off, to you know, to have a sounding board, to get some reflection and some empathic response from a concerned individual, I think is really, really beneficial. And I think sometimes that's mostly what's needed. So I think, you know, giving the time and the compassion and the concern for people coming back in from having a period at home, either working from home or being furloughed off work, is really important. I'm not suggesting managers and team leaders that you all suddenly become counsellors and therapists, not by any stretch of the imagination, but I do think that we need to have a greater emphasis just now on that facet of being a good manager, which includes being available to your employees, being prepared to hear both the facts and feelings of their experience, being prepared to give an ear to that which might compromise their ability to fully perform well when they get back into work. So a good deal of listening and showing compassion, I think would be my one top tip. There may be things that people want to say to you that they don't want broadcast around the whole office. I wouldn't be at all surprised. So being at home with your kids or elderly relatives or just your partner over this period of time can be, like it or not, a bit stressful. There have been lots of articles over the last few weeks and months. I've been keeping a close eye on how relationships are impacted by suddenly finding yourself around your kids or partner or elderly relatives or people with any sort of pre-existing conditions, of course, 24 hours a day. Normally we only see people for 7 or 8 waking hours a day during the week, a bit more at the weekends. But suddenly you're around people all this time. Our sleep patterns have been disrupted. There's been a 50% increase in mental health issues amongst adults. That is incredible. I was just looking at a survey from the Health and Safety Executive and also some figures from Mind, the mental health organisation. 50% increase in reports of mental health issues from adults during the pandemic and especially during lockdown. That's incredible. So I think some of the stuff that people are going to want to say to you about their own health, about their own emotional state, about what's going on in terms of their wider relationships, that needs to be done privately. So be prepared to shut the door is all I'm saying there, and have private one-to-ones with staff. Don't be scared. I'm not suggesting, like I say, that we all become counsellors, but let's say it's important to shut the door sometimes and have these private conversations. That's 2. Let's have a look at number 3. Allow people to contribute to changes. I think this whole period has been very disempowering. There have been things, you know, way out of our control to do with where we can go, what we can do, how we can relate to people, whether we can, you know, have a social life outside of the home and outside of Zoom quizzes. So, you know, it's been a very disempowering period. And I think people now getting back into work, I think they would like to, and certainly I would like to, if you know, I was going back into a workplace in that way, to contribute to the changes that are taking place. So invite people's opinion, invite people's input. It's they that have to put up with it. Make sure that you're having a very worker-centred contribution and dialogue about what needs to happen and what has to change. I think there will be difficult conversations. There are going to be, as we've seen on the Imogen and Heather video, fallouts due to miscommunication, misperceptions about what's changed, about procedures that are now different, about simple, mundane things, about where we now put the purchase ledger printout. Don't avoid those difficult conversations. I sound a bit dinosaurish there, but have the difficult conversations. It's up to you as a team leader and a manager to allow space for those difficult conversations to take place, either between employees or between you and employees. Maybe they've got issues with you. If you're the decision maker about how stuff is being changed or reorganized, make sure that you are, you've got a listening ear for people's complaints about what you've done. Don't avoid those conversations. We do know, and I'm sorry if I'm making the same point again, but it's such an important point. We do know that if you address conflict early on, it stops it from getting into something bigger. It stops people getting into factions. It stops other people getting drawn in, and it makes sure that we can have a consensual and collaborative approach to sorting out these definitely difficult issues. So don't avoid those difficult conversations, team leaders and managers. Make sure you're allowing space for that. Let's move on to, I'm getting a few comments here. I think I might just address a few comments. So Wendy, thanks very much. Wendy says, is this being recorded? We can watch again later. Yes, you can. It's going to be on YouTube. You may even be watching it on YouTube right now. Bill says, managers need support in how to manage people working remotely and those in the office. I quite agree, Bill. I think it's not necessarily an intuitive thing to be able to, to know what to do about this. It's not an intuitive thing. We're all used to managing people face to face. So managing people remotely, certainly there are some ideas about that on the resources that we've got on our roadmap. So with one or two organisations outside of our own, like I say, it's not a salesy, money-making thing, our roadmap. It's just a set of resources for people. So there's one or two organisations we can point you towards who might be able to help in terms of how differently to manage people when they're working from home or on reduced hours as well, of course. So yes, I quite agree, Bill. Managers do need supporting in how to manage those working remotely versus those in the office. It's not an intuitive thing. It's not something we're used to doing. Return to work plans, be flexible. We don't know everything about people's personal circumstances when we put the design in place for what would happen when folks return to work. So people who've got partners, they may have children who thought they were going back to school in a certain way, and it's turned out that's not going to be the case. Their partner's work was going to be a certain way, and it's turned out not to be the case. Their elderly relatives, this was the expectation, and that's turned out not to be the case. So there's so many variables, there's so many changing things. For ourselves at UK Mediation, there's a deal of international work that we'd got scheduled, which we'd postponed, which we thought we were going to be doing round about now, and that's all had to change as of a couple of days recently. A couple of days notice we've had to do with the countries that the UK is now requiring quarantine from. That's changed week by week. So, we do have to have this flexibility in the return to work plans. So don't think as a team leader, a manager or decision maker that you've got it all mapped out. You know exactly what's going to happen when people get back in the workplace. Do be flexible, be prepared to roll with the punches and change your plans. Number 6, be alert to potential grudges. People don't always say what's on their mind, so you need to take a close look at people's working relationships. You can't be breathing down people's necks, obviously, but get in amongst your team and get a sense of what's going on so that you're alert to potential grudges. This person may feel that person's got a better deal. Heather thinks this about Imogen, Imogen thinks this about Heather. It's often the case that people don't say what's on their mind. We tend to hang on to things that are difficult to say or things that we believe are going to result in conflict. So again, I think in the absence of good dialogue, one of the things that goes on is that we project our own imaginings about what the relationship is or what the deal is or what the arrangement is or what somebody thinks of you, and then we hang on to what it is that we need to say. So there's a fancy word for it as retroflexion. So what we do is we bite our lip. So actually, Imogen may have some things to say to Heather in our little video piece there, but she's holding on to it because she wants to be polite. She doesn't want to rock the boat. She doesn't want to upset anybody. She doesn't want to be the squeaky wheel. So be aware that there may be potential grudges going on that people are not expressing. You need to get amongst your people and sound out and make sure that you know what's happening, so that you head off again these potential grudges that people have, especially in a sense of somebody believing that someone else is getting a better deal or better arrangement than they are. Let me move on to number 7. So shared responsibility on rules. So we saw in the video that Imogen was frantically scrubbing the desk while Heather huffed and puffed. So you need to have obviously the rules, our COVID-19 safe workplaces. We all know about that. And there are rules about one-way systems and sanitising and wiping desks and shared spaces and especially welfare spaces, what we're going to do about those, our kitchens and kettles and washing up, and so this is a shared responsibility to make this work. It's not about some people blaming others for not doing what they're supposed to do, or just some people doing what they're supposed to and some people not doing what they're supposed to. What I notice is not so much in the workplace, but in general or roundabouts, a real inconsistency. I see people who are very careful. I was in a restaurant recently, was met at the door by somebody with a visor and gloves who showed me to this newly scrubbed table, and my party and I sat down, and I found I was with the family, and it was quite well done. They came with the tray of food, which we lifted the plates off ourselves, so they weren't even touching the plates. Fantastic. As we left, the manager stood there by the door to shake our hands, and I thought, well, hold on a minute, you've missed the point here. So I find that real inconsistency. Supermarkets, they're requiring people to wear masks, and our local supermarket, none of the staff is wearing masks, and the staff are coming really close to people, stacking shelves, leaning over trolleys. The need for consistency. This is a shared responsibility in the workplace. Everybody needs to contribute to making this work. There are some sensible and basic precautions that we're all having to take, and it's not one or two people's responsibility or their fault if it goes wrong. It's about having this shared commitment to make it work between us in a collaborative way. Except no one's got all the answers. I think it's clear that we can't anticipate everything. I think with people coming back into work, there may be something we've missed. Perhaps we got this bit wrong. Perhaps we got that bit wrong. A company spoke to us just recently, something to do with the car parking arrangements around their COVID safety, that when you got through the door of the building, it seemed that things were quite well thought out. But then people were hanging around in the car park for a cigarette, and somebody had to run the gauntlet between this crowd of other people to get to their car. And this resulted in a complaint and a rather personalised situation between two individuals. So, there are things that we may have overlooked. Accept that nobody's got all the answers. Stay in touch with people, hear the feedback. It has to be a bi-directional thing. It's not just you as the team leader, manager or decision maker telling people how it's got to be. So also be aware, that you explained all your decisions and that you may have got them wrong. But help people understand the criteria on which you've decided to do it in this particular way and why we're doing X, Y, Z and not A, B, C. And help people to understand what's behind your decision, which you may have got wrong, of course. So have that vulnerability to recognise that perhaps you've not anticipated everything, or not sort of had the foresight to have a procedure to cover every eventuality. And ease people back in. It's not going to happen on day one. Don't expect that with your map, with your plans, that's it, done that, okay, now we just carry on for the next 6 months and everything's going to be okay. Just ease people back in. It's not going to be okay straight away. Do recognise, there will be tears and tantrums, there may be fallouts, there may be difficult things that need to be expressed either between workers or between workers and you. And just, be understanding that it's going to take a while for everybody to find their feet again. So a few tips there. I've limited it to 10. There's probably a few more I could say, but that's all on the conflict roadmap. And all on all there for reference with the link that we've put into the chat. Another little comment here. So we've got managers, HR professionals, OD advisors to think about all of this that we're talking about today before introducing new updated policies. So yeah, I absolutely agree. Have a good think. Don't do the policy first and think later. I absolutely agree. So And also the reference here on the comment is about inclusion, policies on inclusion. So I quite agree. It's a complex, definitely Bill, it's a complex set of processes here. There's a lot to think about. What else can be done? Well, if we do get conflict between two individuals, it won't surprise you to hear that I'm going to mention mediation. So in the event that there needs to be some resolution that goes beyond what the manager can deal with. So a lot of managers are very skilled in facilitating resolution meetings, but sometimes the depth of conflict, or the fact that you're too close to it, or the fact that you may have a different relationship with the two people who fall out as a consequence of what's happened when they return to work, it means that you can't be completely impartial. So what we can do is to get somebody else, either from within the organisation or from outside the organisation, who can be impartial, who uses the staged process and keeps an orderly conversation going between the two individuals who've fallen out, like Imogen and Heather, and gets people to reach their own preferred solution without solution giving themselves. So I skipped through that pretty quickly. There's, you know, those of you who follow our webinars, and I see we've got quite a few repeat offenders on the webinar today. You're very, very welcome, of course. So, you know, you'll know that this is how mediation works. So we have an impartial practitioner keeping order in a conversation between two people who've fallen out, perhaps over the return to work arrangements, get them to come up with a solution, and don't just arbitrate and tell them what to do. You know, help them to come up with their own ideas for how to solve it. And so long as the people involved have agreed to participate and are prepared to work by some ground rules and be open and honest with each other, it's a very successful process, and it allows the participants to release that tension that may have built up during lockdown or during their period of furlough or working from home, and to diffuse that anger or frustration in a non-damaging way. So what we saw was with Imogen and Heather, the manager had got them together, started to get them to have a conversation. So offload this pent-up frustration, this pent-up anger in a non-damaging way. I think that's a really helpful start when you're trying to get this dialogue going between people, but also understand, you know, the impact of people's own words and actions, so they can see and hear how the other has been affected by them. So if Imogen is upset by how Heather has spoken to her, you know, it's really helpful for the greater outcome. It's really helpful for Heather to know what the impact of her words have been on Imogen, and build dialogue. That's what we're all about. So we're building dialogue. We're trying to have a constructive exchange of people's different views about how they feel their position, how they've got back to work. And the mediator will help that along by using reframing. So a very quick revision of reframing, especially for those of you who are out there who are trained mediators. What we tend to do, so with the return to work situation, people coming back in after a period of working from home or being on furlough or shielding, things are not right. The workplace is not right for them at all. They're looking for somebody to blame. So what we're inclined to do as a species is we look for whose fault is this, and then we finger point. We say, hey, it's you. You've made this happen to me. You know, the reason I'm unhappy, or I'm sitting facing the wall on a really rubbish working regime, working 7 till 3:15 each day on some changed duties with a new procedure that I don't even understand properly. This is your fault. What people might also do is talk about past events a lot. You know, they'll say this is typical, or this is because you only got the job because the manager likes you, or the manager's favoured you. And the third thing that we tend to do is we tend to take up positions. So we say, I'm not going to sit at that desk. I'm not coming in between 7 and 3:15. I'm not going to do this, I'm not going to do that. You've got to do this and you've got to do that. So this is how we tend to behave in conflict. And this is based on, like I say, you know, many years experience working with people in conflict. This appears to be what we do, is to blame and point the finger, very much lean back on history and say, look, this has always happened and it's because of these historic events that we're in this bad situation, and take up positions. So say what has to happen. So what we do as mediators is we try and engender this sense of a shared responsibility to make the most of the return to work situation. So a shared responsibility between a couple of people who are in dispute, or a whole team that's in dispute, to try and make things better. A general acceptance that you can't change the past. People are going to need to give you their narrative about the past, and they will be different narratives, and they're not going to agree about what's happened up to this point. But as mediators, what we try and do is reframe that dialogue so that we can talk about future actions instead. A case of, okay, so what are we going to do about it? This is what we've got. What are we going to do about it? So the reframing comes in moving from the past to the future and to get away from people's positions, which is just their insistence on what should happen or what shouldn't happen or whose fault it is, into interests. So we're looking at people's underlying needs and drivers and imperatives and motives, and trying to get a dialogue going in a conversation with an impartial third party so that everybody gets their needs met. My need in coming back to work after being off is just for a bit of reassurance. My need is to feel that the office has been, sorted out fairly, that work is being allocated in a way that ensures that everybody's pulling equal weight, that the team leader or manager has got, an unbiased and a fair approach to what's happening in the return to work arrangement. So all of these things are my interests, and these are the things that need to be paid attention to if we're having a facilitated conversation between two people who've fallen out. So picture an Imogen and Heather situation in your workplace. This is what a mediator or somebody in the role of mediator would need to do. Everything I'm talking about in terms of the anatomy of conflict and the way that we make sense of conflict, looking at the psychology of what goes wrong when we fall out with other people or have miscommunication, we put that together into our relational model of Retalk. Retalk is the underpinning basis of everything we do around here at UK Mediation in terms of our training, in terms of our mediation processes. It's basically a way of understanding the people who are in conflict as a way of being able to address their conflict. And essentially we're all about restoring dialogue, we're all about repairing relationships and rebuilding teams. So using these underlying principles, putting it into a mediation model, and applying that either by training you to do it or by providing an external mediator to do it ourselves. This is how we resolve conflict. So what else can be done? There's the mediation bit. What else can be done? Just have a quick look at our comments again. So we've got a comment that says, it sounds like leaders need to think about creating a restorative culture and not a punitive one. Spot on. Yeah, that's a very good comment. And Stuart, you're there as well. Stuart, thanks for that. Restorative practices are key here. I agree. So the restorative practices, for those of you who are less familiar with that, it's about talking about the impact of events on individuals and the impact of one another's words and actions on another party. How have you been affected by what's happened or by what somebody else has said and done, and then thinking about restoring that relationship, restoring that situation through action, about what can we now do about it, given that that is the impact. But essentially it's about dialogue building. Essentially it's all about how can we get back to a better place with better relationships. Okay, so we're going to move on a little bit and take a look at the what else can be done. So let's have a think. Training mediation skills. So one possibility is that you've got mediators yourself. If you haven't, you can always train in mediation skills. We're not talking about necessarily qualifying as mediators, but just training in the skills of mediation so that you can run resolution meetings. You either qualify or run resolution meetings. So the first bit there is about qualifying your own in-house mediators with our level 4 qualification or similar, but also you don't need necessarily to go that far. So think about just helping your managers and team leaders to gain confidence in being able to facilitate resolution meetings. That's all. Just that confidence and competence to be able to walk towards these situations that are bound to arise when people get back into work. You don't have to be a mediator. You don't even have to mention mediation to them. In fact, to an extent, I wouldn't. But a manager having a greater confidence and competence and inclination to feel that they've got some skills that they can lean back on to get 2s and 3s and 4s and whole teams of people together and facilitate resolution meetings so that people can get back to a place of collaborating rather than competing or feeling resentful towards each other. Just the skills to be able to bring those conversations about. And also frontline staff resolution skills. So, people that need to have more robust conversations around difficult issues might benefit from confident conversations training or managers mediators. So teaching managers how to bring reports together in a safe way with the door closed and just have these resolution meetings. So what I'm saying is, what else can we do? You can upskill your own people. Upskill your own people so that you can bring 2s and 3s or even greater numbers of people together, have the sorts of conversations that are necessary, and make sure that we haven't got this, we're not landing into a situation of conflict when people get back from furlough or back from working from home. Got a question from Nick, who says, should we set timescales for resolving employees' concerns or address issues on an individual basis? So thanks for that, Nick. So obviously, Nick, you're thinking about, should we have a set period? Should we say it's got to be 2 weeks or 4 weeks to address concerns, or address it on an individual basis? No, definitely I would go for the latter there, Nick. I would address it on an individual basis. I think it's unrealistic and potentially a loss of your impartiality to say this has to be sorted by this time. I mean, it's a tricky one. If it's interpersonal conflict, I think it's so multifaceted and so personal and goes so deep, Nick, that it's very difficult to set a time scale. But if it's a procedural matter and your throughput of work or the quality of your work is clearly dependent on deadlines, and there are interdependent processes within your organisation, it's waiting for people to sort out XYZ procedure, then maybe yes, it needs a timescale. But I would say the short answer is when it's interpersonal conflict, it's very difficult to make it run to the clock or to the calendar. It's a good question. Well, the possibility, if you're not going to skill up your own people, is to use our external mediation service. So we can deliver you a bright and shining mediator. Our expert mediator's got years of experience. I won't go into the detail, but we're trained and accredited to the highest level in the industry. We have a panel of mediators all up and down the UK. Great thing about having external mediators is that when you bring somebody in from outside, they're independent and impartial. They've no prior contact with the participants, with the people who've fallen out. You get somebody in there pretty quickly, 5 days notice, and there you go. You've got a mediator to help a conversation to happen, either with one-to-one or a small number of people, or even a large team. We usually use 2 mediators for disputes that involve any more than 4 people. We make sure that we've got it well managed. So possibility is to train up your own people internally, or to get mediators to come in from the outside. So that, in a nutshell, is some of the considerations for the sort of conflict that can arise when you return to work, and the sorts of things that you can do about it. I'll put up my screen that says any questions, but we've had a great stream of questions today while I've been talking. If there are further questions, now's the time, but let's have a look. So here we go. We put up a link in the chat box about Retalk. There's a link appeared there in the chat box, so you can look up the relational model Retalk if you want to hear a bit more about that. We've got a question from Jasmine. Thank you for Jasmine. We have a bit of a split in our office between those who were on furlough and those who weren't. It's all got a bit clicky. What can we do? Now, this is possibly the most common question we've had, Jasmine, which is, there's a sense of now everybody's got back or is getting back into the workplace. There's the people who have remained in the office during lockdown, and then there were the people who were either furloughed or who worked from home. The work from home is not so bad, because working from home, if that situation's been well managed, all the people working from home would have been in touch daily or 2 daily through Zoom to talk to the office-based people. But if you've been furloughed, you've been out of the loop. And although it happened for the first 3 or 4 weeks of furlough that everybody was in touch with you and rang and texted and kept in contact in social media, that did seem to tail off. It seems to have happened in quite a few workplaces. So the people who've been furloughed, they feel as if they're a bit neglected. Now they've come back into the workplace, they see this well-formed and well-maintained team of people who had remained in the office, and it feels as if they're being a bit excluded. The responsibility is on the individuals to try and address that at the personal level, but also on the manager or team leader to get everybody together and say, hey, there's something here that needs to be addressed. Don't shy away from it, would be the short answer, Jasmine. So as the team leader or manager in that situation, I would say there's a potential problem here where we've got an in-group and an out-group. I want to nip it in the bud. Let's talk about what we can do about it. And I would drive straight into that. I wouldn't leave it even a few days. If I saw that happening, drive straight into it, name the game, and see what you can do to get a good dialogue going so that everybody's getting their needs met. The people who've been on furlough may feel as if they've been left out of the loop. they've been a bit ignored. The people who've been back at work have formed their, not to put too fine a point on it, a subculture, and it's time to name that and to make sure that this is addressed in a very collaborative way, so that this doesn't give rise to any bigger problems down the road. Another question from Derek. Thank you, Derek. With increased personnel working from home, do you think mediation can work effectively remotely using Zoom? Absolutely. So we have done many cases on Zoom and continue to do so over the course of lockdown. I'm a convert. We've always done remote mediation. At UK Mediation, we've always used Zoom, for example, for international disputes, for where people have remote management, for where you've got people in different parts of the world. We've always tried it as a, an alternative to getting people face to face. But we've used it that much recently. I think we've really got the hang of it, and I think Zoom works really well for doing especially team mediations, actually, with its breakout rooms and the whiteboard function and da-da-da-da-da. So yes, short answer to your question, Derek, is can mediation work effectively remotely using Zoom? Yes, it can. And if you want to pursue that, you're very welcome to either look at our online mediation in action webinar, where we illustrate an online mediation from start to finish, and there's a link in the chat box, or we do have some short trainings for that. If you want to get in touch with us, Derek, we do a half a day course on online mediation and so on, but there's a good free resource there, the online mediation in action webinar, and the link has just appeared in the chat box. And Bill says, with some irony, he says, it seems that COVID-19 has created some new fertile ground for mediation practitioners. I think it's an interesting point, Bill, and I think some commercial mediators are rubbing their hands over this situation, because many commercial mediations where the relationship doesn't matter as much, I would say it always matters a bit, but in commercial disputes where it doesn't matter as much and where it's purely about financial and contractual matters, and where the intended outcome from the mediation is the provision of goods and services or a payment of money, remote mediation has always worked well, and I think people have realised during lockdown that it's actually a really good tool. For other sort of disputes, in my experience, where it's more interpersonal, where it's more to do with relationships, where it's more to do with perceptions and misperceptions, I think there's no substitute for the face-to-face mediation, and I'm really looking forward to having our mediators get back into doing face-to-face mediations. We've done one or two in the last week or so, but us getting back into the swing of doing face-to-face for those interpersonal matters. But I think, yes, you're right. I think people have realised through lockdown that remote mediation is fine for a lot of commercial disputes. It works perfectly well, and you don't need to leave your office or your bedroom. Okay, thank you very much for the questions and comments. And just before I achieve my goal of only talking for 45 minutes, which I've just gone over, forthcoming webinars. We have a list of webinars. You can register at that link there, and we'll put that up in the chat box as well. Just a couple that are around the corner. The one that you may be interested in for now is the one in September, which is our business boardroom and B2B conflicts. So Friday 25th September at 12 o'clock. This is a strand of work that I've got particularly interested in over recent years, which is working with boardrooms and with business fallouts within businesses, but also B2B conflict, so business to business conflict. So, the premise is that boardrooms and businesses are more effective and more powerful places when they have the right degree of constructive conflict. Constructive conflict can bring about change, innovation, new ideas, new ways of thinking about things, better understanding between people. So we do quite a bit of work in this area, particularly resolving disputes within organisations, in boardrooms, within businesses, and between businesses at a sort of strategic level. We are looking forward to telling you all about that on Friday 25th of September, and I won't list all the other webinars, but what you can find is a schedule at this place, so more to be announced. Do visit the schedule, see what's coming up. The link has just appeared in the chat box again. And other than that, thank you very much for being with us today. Do keep in touch. There's all the ways you can keep in touch with us. And if you just have a situation you want to chat through with us, you're very welcome to drop us a message, and you can get a call back. You'll get a call back same day, and we can happily talk a situation through with you. If you need some help with what's going on in your place with conflict arising from return to work, just give us a call. We're very friendly and helpful. We'll be glad to talk you through things, and we'll look forward to speaking to you about that. Otherwise, like and subscribe on YouTube. You can follow us on Twitter. You can visit our LinkedIn page or check out our Facebook as well. Thanks ever so much. That's the end of our webinar for today on return to work conflict, and all the best to you. Have a great weekend.